Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and with the announcement of the new iPhones recently, I figured it'd be a good time to revisit my iPhone buying guide for the latter part of 2020. So if you've been around for a while, you probably know how this works. We're gonna start from the best of the best with the $1,000+ iPhones and go all the way down to the $50 iPhones. That's right, $50. The used market is a wonderful thing. I'll be giving pros and cons for each iPhone that is currently supported on iOS 14. I think anything lower than that probably isn't worth your money. And at the end of the video, I'll give my overall recommendations for your general price range. So if you don't want to hear every iPhone and want to skip to the end, I'll have timestamps in the description below. But without further ado, let's get started. Let me just preface this by saying all the prices I'll be using to describe the iPhones are just the unlocked prices. So they're what it would cost to buy the phone straight up from Apple in American dollars. If you were going to buy on contract with a plan or some sort of deal, obviously it's not going to cost, say, $1,000 straight up. So just thought I would clarify that. Starting with the best of the best, we have the iPhone 12 Pro and 12 Pro Max going for $999 and $1099 respectively. These phones are terrific. They don't have 120 Hz refresh rates, something that would make the display feel buttery smooth and a feature everyone wanted, but beyond that, they're about as good as a flagship gets. Top of the line specs, fantastic camera system with an ultra-wide, wide, and telephoto zoom lens, and then of course the all-new LiDAR system, which brings some unique aspects to the photography as it measures the range of subjects and is supposed to especially improve low-light photos. The new design is also fantastic and is, in my opinion, one of the best looking phones Apple's ever made. The notch, of course, is still there, but the edges are more square and reminiscent of the iPhone 5. This is a great phone, but gee golly, is it ever expensive. I'd say in the vast majority of cases, this phone just isn't worth buying. It's just too much for what you get, and you're not going to give up a whole lot, saving a couple $100s and opting for the iPhone 12 instead. If you're the kind of person who likes getting the best out there when you upgrade, go for it. Although if you have the 11 Pro from last year, I strongly recommend holding out another year, as the 13 should be bringing a lot more cool features, and the 12 Pro really doesn't have that much different from the 11 Pro. By the way, the entire iPhone 12 line has 5G network capabilities, so if you actually have 5G coverage in your area, you do have that as well, which is cool. But now let's go to the iPhone 12 and 12 mini, the so-called budget options to the 12 Pro. The mini will cost you $700, and the regular 12 will cost you $800. The mini is very small, and while it has a screen size of 5.4 inches, the actual phone itself is even smaller than the 2020 iPhone SE. The bigger iPhone 12 size is very similar to the 11 and 10R at 6.1 inches, but both the mini and 12 have a huge advantage over the older models: OLED display panels. This means a better resolution and crisper images, as well as deeper blacks and vivid colors. There's no comparison. These phones will look fantastic up against any older LCD iPhone, and so if you have an iPhone that's a couple years old and are considering upgrading, I really do think the iPhone 12 is for you. I think the mini is a lot more niche. Most people I know would prefer the bigger size, but if you're a fan of it, go for it. You save $100 in the process, so hey, these are fantastic phones, and I think the value is quite good, especially because they're not missing much from the 12 Pro. They don't have LiDAR, and they don't have a telephoto lens, and a little less RAM, and so on and so forth, but practically speaking, they're very similar, and the 12 is just going to be better value. And so I fully recommend getting the iPhone 12 if you're interested. And then of course there's the iPhone 11 Pro and Pro Max, which I'll briefly cover. These phones are no longer being sold by Apple, as the 12 Pro line has replaced them completely, just like the iPhone 10 and 10s were replaced. The 11 Pro is still a top-of-the-line phone, to the point I'm currently planning on using mine for another year. So if you have one already, upgrading is unnecessary. But if you don't, I'd recommend looking at the 12 or the 12 Pro. You will still be able to find the 11 Pro with some carriers for a bit longer as the stock is being cleared out, and then there's always the used market, but I think just the value of the 12 can't be beat. Overall, the 11 Pro is still awesome, just hard to find now that it's been discontinued. Moving to the iPhone 11, we can find it on Apple's website for $600, which is an amazing price for a phone of this caliber. Yes, the screen is LCD and will look quite a bit worse than the 12, but considering you're saving $200, unless you're interested in the 12 mini, which is only $100 more, I think it's worth it. This is going to be the iPhone to buy this coming year, in my opinion, as it just hits the mark of everything someone wants. Amazing battery life, great camera and ultra-wide lens, a good sized display at 6.1 inches. There's not a lot to complain about here. And so if you're the kind of person in the market for an iPhone and don't want to pay too much but also have a decent chunk of change to spend, I think this is 100% the one to get. But if $600 is slightly too rich for your blood, you can always go to the iPhone 10R, the phone one peg lower in Apple's current lineup. The 10R is $500 and looks mostly identical to the iPhone 11, just without an ultra-wide lens. Overall, it's as close as you can get to the iPhone 11 without, being an iPhone 11, so so I think it's actually at a pretty fair price. Personally, I'd spend the extra 100 and get the better phone, but the XR is still great and has a long life ahead of it in terms of software updates and support. Also, I absolutely love the Coral XR for what it's worth, and the 11 colors just aren't as appealing to me personally, but that is just, yeah, personal preference. Then there's the cheapest iPhone Apple sells, the iPhone SE. No, not that one, the one that came out in early 2020. This phone has the same chipset as the iPhone 11 Pro and the same body as the small iPhone 8, making it the last iPhone to have a home button. This phone starts at $400 from Apple, and it's the perfect option for those who just need a phone but not a lot from it besides a decent camera and the ability to make calls. If you're just not ready to move on from the home button, this is straight up the best phone you can buy. It's fairly small with a screen size of 4.7 inches, which is the same as the iPhone 6, 6S, 7, and 8. It is kind of tough for me to recommend this phone, not because it's bad value, but because the XR is now only $100 more, and with it you're getting a bigger phone with that full screen design that I think most people would prefer. Ultimately, if you need the home button, get the SE, but otherwise I'd recommend going to the XR or the 11. And now let's look at the iPhone XS and XS Max, which I skipped over to talk about the rest of the iPhones Apple is actually selling. These phones aren't being sold by Apple, obviously, and will be difficult to find from a carrier if you can find them new at all, which means you'll be turning to the used market. They're essentially the XR with a better OLED display, and of course a telephoto camera lens, so really I'd recommend paying the $500 for the XR brand new, as the XS will probably be pretty similarly priced used on eBay or Craigslist or wherever you look. That being said, if you find a deal and you think it's worth it for you and really want the XS, go for it. It's still a good phone and the display is great, although particularly in the smaller one, battery life really isn't that good, and the XR performs much better, so just keep that in mind. Then there's the iPhone X from 2017, which also can't really be found new anymore and tends to go for around $400 to $500 or so on the used market. I was specifically looking at eBay. That's a little bit much for this phone. It's not terrible, and this phone is still pretty good, but it's a bit behind when it comes to the specs, and I think most would be happier with that iPhone XR for not a whole lot more money. Of course, the screen on the 10 is fantastic, and if you can find a deal for it, I fully recommend getting the phone. And now that the new iPhones are coming out, used market prices should start trending down. Watch out for the battery life. Like the XS, it isn't very good. The iPhone X is one of my favorite phones of all time, and if you get it, I think you'll like it, but for most people, I would point you to the iPhone XR or 11. Also from 2017, we have the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, which Apple stopped selling with the release of the 2020 iPhone SE, which means it's difficult to find them new. Turning to eBay.com, the iPhone 8 goes for around $250, $300 or so, and the Plus is more closer to $400. I think that is a bit much for these phones. They're both great, and there's a certain level of appeal that comes with the 8 Plus, given that it's the best large iPhone with a home button, even to this day, because, you know, the 2020 SE only comes in the small option. But given, again, that the XR starts at $500 new, I don't know. For me, it's hard to recommend buying used anyways, as you just never fully know what you're getting. Battery life is always questionable, although the 8 Plus, in my experience, is pretty good. The 8, not so much. Is it worth, say, $250 for the small iPhone 8? I do think so. I'd encourage you to make sure you're getting a good condition model, and keep in mind, it might be hurting in the battery department. I think the 8 Plus is a bit too expensive for what it is, although if you can find a deal for it, why not? These are still great phones for sure, and have a few years left in terms of support. Then from 2016, we have the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, and we're starting to get to the very cheap options, albeit only ones that can be found used. The 7 seems to go for about $200 or a bit lower, and the 7 Plus is like $300-ish. I think these phones are worth the price of admission for the most part, although again, when it comes to the 7 Plus, I'd really encourage you to go up to the iPhone XR. The smaller 7 for say $150 if you can find it is a terrific deal. Watch out for the battery life, of course, and keep in mind the camera isn't going to be as good as modern devices, but you should have another couple years of support, and it'll do the job. Past that is the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus. You can find a half-decent 6S for as low as like $100 if you look around, which is pretty fantastic considering it runs iOS 14, not half bad. Battery life will of course be rough nowadays, that's just a fact, but if you keep a charger nearby, it will more than do the job. The 6S Plus is more like $150 to $200. I think $150 isn't too bad, but if you're buying this phone, you're probably trying to save money, and so you might as well save your money and get the smaller 6S. Battery will be a bit better with the 6S Plus, but it's still not going to be very good in most used devices. These things are 5 years old at this point, what do you expect? And then we come to the ultimate budget option, the original 2016 iPhone SE. This phone can be had for as low as like $50, and that is extraordinary value, given it can run the latest version of iOS 14. There's really no arguing here, you're not going to have good battery life, and the camera will be mediocre, but considering it's $50, I don't think it really matters. And again, when I say $50, it's in that range. I've seen it as high as $100, but I've also seen a lot around $60, and some lower than $50, $50, so you just have to look around. It's just such a good price point, and if you need a phone as quick as possible or just can't afford much, this is the phone to buy. And to clarify, the iPhone SE is essentially the 6S, but smaller. They're very similar across the board, so if you're interested in the 6S, but wouldn't mind a smaller phone, definitely save that $50 and get the SE. So that's all the iPhones currently being supported by iOS 14. Phew, feels like I went through a lot more than usual, and that's because I kinda did, as the SE and 6S didn't lose support this year like the iPhone 6 and 5S did last year. I really think any iPhone not being supported by iOS 14 isn't going to be worth it, as it'll be stuck back on iOS 12, and considering the SE is only around $50, I just don't see the point of going any cheaper. So which iPhone is for you? Good question. If you want the best of the best of the best that Apple can offer at least, of course the iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max are going to be the phones to look at. If you want a high-end upgrade without completely breaking the bank, and a phone that will last you many years if you'd like it to, the iPhone 12 is pretty darn good for the $800 it costs. The iPhone 12 mini at $700 doesn't feel as good value to me, but if you want a small phone, this is the best option. If you're closer to mid-tier in terms of budget, both the iPhone 11 and XR are good options for you at around $600 to $500 respectively. Which you get is up to you. The 11 has a better camera system, but beyond that, you won't notice very many differences. If you want to keep the home button at any cost and don't care that the XR is not that much more money than the 2020 iPhone SE, then get the 2020 iPhone SE for $400. It's basically a modern iPhone 8, and it's a great little machine. If you're looking at low-end iPhones, it gets a little bit more difficult. A used iPhone 7 or 8 can be had for cheap, but the Plus versions are generally overpriced. I can't really recommend anything in particular. All I can say is look out for a deal and try to find what you want at a price that works for you. The used market varies so much location to location, and prices will likely start to go down given that we have that new wave of iPhones. If you're on a really strict budget, the iPhone 6S or the basically identical iPhone SE are the phones to go for. The SE, again, is just a smaller 6S, and so generally that's the one I'm going to recommend, and at around $50, maybe a bit more, you just can't beat it for value. If you just need an iPhone and don't want to spend much, get the SE. It running iOS 14 is just the cherry on top. Overall, the best value iPhones in my opinion would be the iPhone XR and 11. I think they're both at very fair price points, and I don't believe anyone would regret picking one up. They've got long lives ahead of them, and I have no complaints to mention besides the displays not being amazing. But for the average user and non-enthusiast, these are the phones to go for. And with that, I think I'm about done here. So hopefully this helped you out, and if it did, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at 91_tech if you'd like to for some reason. And with that all being said, thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.